Thank you for this opportunity to speak about my dissertation research entitled A Case Study of MicroSociety Students Engaging Learners in a Real-World Learning Community. My name is Brent Galloway, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta in elementary education. This video presentation will be approximately 25 minutes in length. For my doctoral study, I was interested in exploring the possibilities for engaging learners after having an opportunity to spend time in an experiential program called MicroSociety. Intrigued by seeing how the program empowered its students with its focus on real-world learning, I decided to explore how students experience learning in a MicroSociety school as the focus for my investigations. As an introduction to this presentation, I offer this framework, which is centered on the MicroSociety student, who through their own choice contributed their voice to my study. My study is grounded in the theories and research of John Dewey and Jerome Bruner. In using a case study approach, I was able to gain a more holistic perspective of the MicroSociety program. Through an interpretive inquiry methodology involving methods such as pre-interview activities, the collecting of artifacts and interviews, I was able to gain a deeper understanding of how my participants experienced real-world learning within a community of practice that led to my participants feeling engaged and empowered. MicroSociety was created by George Richmond in the early 1970s as a way to better engage his elementary school students. He worked to create a classroom that replicated a miniature society in which students were given responsibilities similar to those in the adult world, including the creation of an economic system with jobs and taxes, and a political system complete with laws, rights, and responsibilities. Richmond would create an entire school based on the concept of providing real-world learning experiences to students, designed in the tradition of John Dewey, in which doing reinforces learning, and where schools educate children for the world they will enter as adults. He and his wife Carolyn would eventually form MicroSociety International. With its mission of bringing real life to learning, MicroSociety schools are now found throughout the world. My study aimed to investigate how young people experienced an experiential program called MicroSociety. I approached this study with 5 broad research questions in mind. 1. How did former students experience the MicroSociety program? How did these participants interpret their learning experiences of MicroSociety as real-world learning? 3. How were students empowered or disempowered in their participatory roles within the MicroSociety program? 4. How did the participants experience being part of the MicroSociety learning community? And lastly, how were these experiences interpreted as engaging or disengaging by the participants in the program? The age-old problem of relevance and its correlation to disengaged learning is as much a part of the modern debate about educational reform as it was several decades ago. In exploring the works of different educational theorists, I was attracted to the research and theories of John Dewey and Jerome Bruner, who provided the theoretical and conceptual frameworks for my study. Dewey believed in putting the learner in the center of pedagogical decisions. This progressivist notion requires an education based upon a philosophy of experience. As a pragmatist, Dewey proposed that schools become miniature societies that reflected the experiences of the real world. Dewey and his philosophy of experience was a natural connection for my study. As an experiential program, MicroSociety is grounded in Dewey's ideas of students learning about the world through experience and reflection. Dewey's philosophy of interdisciplinary learning, learning by doing, and learning together through play, drama, and work support the simulated world of MicroSociety, as does the idea of accessing the community to enhance learning and empowering students with roles and responsibilities, such as student government. I also chose Bruner to support my theoretical and conceptual framework, not only because of his beliefs in how students constructed meaning, but because of the important responsibilities he believed the teacher had in providing authentic and relevant learning experiences to help motivate students. Although similar to Dewey in his beliefs in the importance of discovery, experience, reflection, and problem solving, Bruner believed the role of the teacher to be of significance in creating experiences focused on inquiry. By the late 20th century, Bruner's thinking evolved once again as he began to place considerable emphasis on learning within a culture based on social interactions, scaffolding, and mediation, as influenced by the work of Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky. Bruner provided significant connections to my study in his ideas of constructivism, inquiry, problem-based learning, and later with his ideas of mediated learning and creating cultures of learning. Further into my study and during the analysis phase of my research, I was introduced to another theory that further enhanced my knowledge of learning communities. An examination of the work of Lav and Wenger and their theory of communities of practice provided an additional framework in which to view my findings. As described by Lav and Wenger, a community of practice is a place where learning is a process that takes place in a participation framework, not in an individual mind. This new theory connected well with those theories provided by Dewey and Bruner and further enhanced the notion of how the MicroSociety program created a community. In my review of the literature, I examined the issue of student engagement in today's schools by first examining the research about the engaged learner, including how others define this concept. I used a definition of engagement that is a composite of the descriptions shown on the screen, in which students are actively involved in constructing deep meaning through experiences that are intrinsically motivating, enjoyable, and which most importantly lead to further learning. I explored the factors that contribute to student disengagement and examined the trends of this problem. Research studies indicate that many children become disengaged as students in today's classroom, a problem that appears to surface early in the middle years of schooling and continues on to high school. Research on student voice suggests that relevancy, standardization, over-testing, and a curriculum that lacks connection to the real world are potential causes to the ongoing problem of student disengagement in today's schools. Lastly, I examined the research around MicroSociety as an experiential learning program and the approaches used within this program that provided ways of engaging and involving learners. Research available has primarily focused on program implementation, student achievement levels, and student attendance rates, with little focus on the students themselves or how they have experienced MicroSociety. Not surprisingly at this time, no published research examines MicroSociety schools within a Canadian or Albertan context. Qualitative research is well suited to inquiring into experiential programs. Cresswell suggests that the goal of educational research is to further our collective understanding of how all aspects of education in order to contribute new knowledge to the field. For my research study, I intentionally utilized qualitative research approaches, which Denzin and Lincoln describe as a situated activity that locates the observer in the world. Conrad and Heaton recommended that when examining experiential learning programs, additional techniques must be developed and used, including interviews, observations, and case studies. I decided to employ a single case study approach to provide depth into my investigation. Merriam stated that because it's anchored in real-life situations, the case study results in a rich and holistic account of a phenomenon. According to Cresswell, researchers use the case study approach to conduct an in-depth analysis of a case, often a program, or one or more individuals. A case study approach allowed me to dig deeply to understand the single phenomenon of MicroSociety, which was being studied. I completed most of my research study at an urban elementary school where the participants experienced the MicroSociety program when they were elementary-aged children. Most of these interviews were conducted on site, which was helpful for the students in recalling their learning experiences in the program, particularly as they looked at photos or artifacts around the school. My study involved research with 6 participants from grades 7 to 12 who, after leaving their elementary MicroSociety school, moved to several different schools in the urban center to complete their education. Although my participants were similar in that they had a shared experience as students in a microsociety school, they were diverse in their backgrounds and experiences within the program. Some were involved in business ventures, while others were involved in government roles and service organizations. Some experienced the program for all 6 years of elementary school, while another only attended the program for 1 year. 3 participants are now middle school students, and 3 are now high school students, including one who recently graduated from grade 12. I wanted to have as many conversations with the student participants to get to know them as much as possible. For this study, the primary sources of data came from the interpretive inquiry interviews with the participants. I also was attracted to the use of visual methods such as photographs, artifacts, and pre-interview activities, which helped to guide discussions. I used pre-interview activities to open the avenues for conversation and to build rapport with the student participants. This included giving students choices to write, draw, or talk about past learning experiences, including those that took place as part of the MicroSociety program. This helps students recall experiences that they found engaging and or disengaging, and help them personally to construct meaning as to what engaged learning meant to them. As a researcher, my role was primarily to listen to the participants in my study and to ask questions to help me better understand the meanings behind their experiences with MicroSociety. Following the introductory meetings, the next stage was to carry out the full interview process with the participants. I was able to complete 4 interviews with most participants, conducted primarily during after-school hours over a 3-month period. Interviews ranged in time from 40 to 60 minutes in length and were spaced out 1 week in between each one. Although I created a predetermined set of questions, I found myself adding new questions throughout the process depending on what each participant had to say. I found the open-endedness of this process to be enlightening, for participants often shared experiences that were not what I had expected, and it was a wonderful way to individually get to know each other. While carrying out the interviews with the participants, my main roles were that of listener, observer, and recorder. I purposely designed open-ended questions that allowed the students to fully share their stories based on their MicroSociety experience. This allowed the student participants to fulfill their role as a storyteller. Interpretive inquiry interviews provided the major focus of my study on how students experience MicroSociety. However, to provide a more complete picture of the program, I was also open to collecting other evidence in the form of photographs, public artifacts, and student-created artifacts, which the participants were willing to share and which were helpful in furthering our conversations in our interviews. These artifacts highlighted what MicroSociety work they were proud of or which was memorable for them. The importance of using multiple sources of evidence is critical in case study research, and I found that students were excited to talk about their personal artifacts. To collect data, I used a variety of tools. First, I used a digital audio recorder during the entire length of the interview process. Second, I took observation notes using a tool called an Echo Smart Pen that uses transcription software to record while at the same time allowing me to take notes. Lastly, I also used a digital camera to record photographs of student artifacts and to take photos of MicroSociety school events and artifacts which were shared with the participants during interviews to help them in recalling their learning experiences. In the data analysis and interpretation process, I was influenced by the work of Creswell and used his data analysis model to guide my interpretation work. I first began by looking at the raw data collected. I then organized and prepared my data for analysis, first by examining each individual participant, and then after coding by the themes that were starting to emerge. This proved helpful in interpreting the meaning of each theme. The analysis of data took place not only during the interview process, but also after I had collected all of the data. Following each individual participant interview, I began to familiarize myself with the data and started to look for key ideas and potential themes as soon as possible after the interview and prior to an interview with another participant. I found it helpful to highlight the gold nuggets as I initially mined through the data. Initially, I reviewed my recorded conversations in field notes and began to organize the data once I began to notice patterns in the data emerging. With subsequent interviews, I began to search for frequent occurrences with participants. This information began as an initial list of ideas of what I noticed in the data and what I found interesting. I wrote down and coded some of the categories that I viewed as important concerning my research questions and that might be indicators of potential themes. I also looked at the other sources of data I collected, including my field notes, pre-interview activities, photos, and artifacts of students' work. This process allowed me to view MicroSociety more holistically and gave me a more profound meaning regarding the data collected and was helpful in identifying initial themes. I revisited the transcript texts of the interviews and color-coded the prominent passages based around the big ideas or themes that were starting to be revealed and were connected to my research questions. Following this, I used a large word table as a synthesis tool to help compare the data that was collected. This process was used to narrow and finalize the most prominent themes that had emerged from my data. I concluded the analysis by choosing 3 dominant themes. Once I had determined these themes, I then created additional wall posters to capture the essence of each theme as constructed by quotes by the student participants themselves. This would prove helpful in writing the chapter on my findings. In my findings, I focused primarily on the 4 participants involved with MicroSociety for all 6 years of their elementary education. For each participant, I described how they experienced the MicroSociety program and presented their experiences in chronological order from the start of the program in kindergarten until they left at the end of grade 5. Participant accounts were structured to reflect their early MicroSociety memories, roles and responsibilities in the program, and their life as micro-citizens, including how they've been involved with the program since leaving their elementary school. Although I had been analyzing, making sense of the data throughout the research process, the final purpose was to articulate what I had learned from my interpretive inquiries. My discussion of my interpretations was structured around 3 dominant themes. 1, experiencing the real world through MicroSociety. 2, developing agency and confidence as a participant of MicroSociety. And 3, learning as part of a MicroSociety community of practice. In the following slides, I elaborate on these themes by sharing several participant quotations. As the MicroSociety program is designed to prepare students through real-life experiences, I was intrigued as to how this aspect contributed to my participants feeling engaged as learners. For these young people, they interpreted the concept of real-world learning as those relevant learning opportunities they believed helped better prepare them for life beyond school. Participants valued how MicroSociety was based around how life works. They appreciated how their school was a place to play in the adult world so that they could learn adulting. This included not only enjoying the perks of adult life, such as having a job, being able to purchase goods and services, and voting, but also the less pleasant aspects of adult life, such as getting loans, paying bills, and borrowing money to cover expenses. Participant responses in this study indicated an appreciation for the ability to learn some aspects of adult life at a young age, rather than having to wait until they were older. Participants frequently described how MicroSociety placed emphasis on hands-on learning through the creation of products and services, which they found more motivating than conventional approaches to learning, such as reading textbooks and taking notes. They also valued how MicroSociety was integrated throughout the curriculum so that they could develop and practice competencies such as critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration, financial literacy, and personal management. The attribute of student agency featured prominently in participant data and was one key aspect contributing to their feelings of engagement. Participants felt engaged by being provided choices and opportunities while in the program with various roles and responsibilities. Through the process of decision making, which often involved taking risks and making mistakes, students appeared to gain a strong sense of agency and self confidence as participants of MicroSociety, with opportunities to make choices and to express themselves. As participants of MicroSociety, they felt that their opinions were valued and important. Participants conveyed a high value on community as experienced through the MicroSociety program, where they got to learn and work together and teach each other the ropes. Both Dewey and Bruner spoke about the contributions that communities provided to students. Dewey spoke of how schools created a miniature community where students learned and worked together, and Bruner's more recent work focused on the idea of creating communities of learners in schools that would help to advance society. Lavin Wagner's theory of community at practice provided an even more accurate description of how MicroSociety was a place where novices and experts worked and helped each other and where everyone is invested for the sake of learning. By purposely developing a sense of community through cooperation, service, projects, cross-graded tutoring, field trips, and guest speakers, the MicroSociety program allowed participants to take charge of their own learning, leading them to feel empowered and engaged in their schools and surrounding communities. It is a testament that all 6 participants are still involved as members of their former MicroSociety school. As one participant stated, "I just love it there." Without exception, all participants described their MicroSociety school experience using positive descriptors. They commented on how time flew by quickly during the program, and they commented on how meaningful the experience was in their lives. My research data revealed that although most participants experienced challenging times during MicroSociety, they did not find this caused them to be disengaged as learners or to lose interest in the program. Based on my participant recollections, few features of the program provided negative experiences for them. Negative comments shared by participants centered around the employment aspects of obtaining a job, which made some participants feel less confident, unpopular, or frustrated. A few participants did not like it when jobs were chosen for them, as this diminished their sense of agency. But the most frequent frustration with the program was that participants did not appreciate it when adults would take over and make decisions on behalf of the students. As a case study, there were several limitations upon completing my research. The inability to generalize, which is typical of case study research, was true for this study. Since I interviewed only 6 participants, their perspectives were based on similar experiences with the MicroSociety program that operated at their former school. The study was focused only on the student perspective. Although valuable information could be gained from interviewing teachers, parents, or community members, this was beyond the purpose of this study. Likewise, additional information from student surveys may have provided a broader understanding of how a larger sampling of students experienced the program. Once again, this was beyond this study's purpose, as I desired to learn more deeply about how each participant experienced this program. I believe a case study approach using interpretive inquiry interviews was the best way to accomplish this goal. Rather than explore program implementation from the perspective of teachers and administrators, or by examining quantitative data of surveys and test scores, I chose the act of listening to former participants talk about their MicroSociety experiences. Although this study is finished, I still desire to know more about how students experience the MicroSociety program. For example, how would students who were now adults describe MicroSociety, and how effective it was in preparing them for the real adult world? A longitudinal study that shadows the same participants over time could examine whether the program had a lasting impact. I also think it'd be worthwhile to explore the perspectives of others connected to the program. A similar study focusing on interviewing teachers could glean valuable details about pedagogy, deep learning, and democratic classrooms. Likewise, interviewing parents could provide a fascinating viewpoint on how they felt MicroSociety prepared their children for the real world. Since community members are a valuable and significant component of the program, their perspectives as members of the MicroSociety community of practice could also provide an interesting component to the research. In the end, though, this study has been about the students. My participants offered ideas such as service learning, a focus on skill development, curriculum integration, and learning collaboratively across grades as potential practices that could build stronger communities in our schools. Changes to policy, curriculum, or instructional practices may aid in helping schools create the types of connected communities that were so valuable to my participants. I conclude that as an experiential program, MicroSociety provided an engaging learning experience for my participants who conveyed their involvement learning in a culture that focused on providing enjoyable, authentic, hands-on, and collaborative learning experiences. The principles of the MicroSociety program, which centered on empowering students to make decisions, allowed participants to fully participate in a community of practice that taught them how to become functioning members of society through the integration of life skills. This study helped shift my thinking beyond the teacher's role in planning engaging learning experiences to thinking more about how students can feel empowered through the development of a community of practice within the school and extending to the surrounding community. Although participants valued the real-world elements and learning activities of MicroSociety, it was the dynamic nature of being part of this community of practice that provided them with their most positive learning experiences. Dewey envisioned schools in which all individuals have an opportunity to contribute and to which all feel a responsibility. He valued schools where students could experience democratic principles with opportunities to collaborate in identifying and solving problems in the community. Bruner also placed considerable importance on the value of creating community in schools, a place to develop a culture of learning between teachers and students. Wenger states that participating in a community of practice is a process by which we can study, experience the world, and our engagement with it as meaningful. Participant experience shared in this study indicate how deeply meaningful and long-lasting it was to be part of a community of practice in a MicroSociety school. Thank you for your interest in my research study. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at my email provided. I also invite you to look at my reference list that I use for this video presentation of my dissertation. Thank you.